Hey everybody, welcome back. It's me, Scott from Heroic Sues Gaming, coming at you with another video. Today we're going to be talking about the RPG Outgunned, this one here. It's actually a pretty interesting game. Outgunned, it's a tabletop RPG that's seeking to recreate the action movies of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. They kind of set a specific limit on what they're making. They clarify that they should take place in cities because cities are great for action movies and should take place kind of no later than the early 2000s, so that like the internet and social media doesn't get in the way of the narrative. And so mostly like cell phones are okay, but you can't just Google stuff up, that kind of thing. It's an interesting take. I can see the point they're trying to make. They're trying to sort of make it make sense to like 80s action movies, but it does feel a little restrictive, in my opinion, because like honestly, done well, like internet and social media can be really helpful for action movies. I think that we have modern action movies where they use those things to their advantage, and that's kind of the same here. Like, there's no reason they couldn't Google how a particular bomb is made, for example, to help defuse it, but these guys were like, oh no, the internet should definitely not be a thing because, I don't know, social media is a problem for action, I guess. I don't know. I would think it'd be fine to have like a social media specialist helping, using their connections to uncover huge Bond villain plots or whatever. But hey, that's for me and not what they're here for. So or the writers of Outgunned are trying to make it like wall-to-wall 80s action movie style. So they wanted the stakes high. They want you to like roll with whatever happens in the game and to be a hero, right? So that's what they were going for in their setting. But yeah, the real clincher with it is essentially that's what it's going for. And the way they did it mostly is through their dice system. So let's talk about that. So Outgunned uses a D6 system, but it's not like the kind of system that you'd expect. Like you definitely are going to make pools of dice by adding your attribute to your skill, right? That's kind of the way we'd expect it to be. But instead of doing this thing where you just, roll it and see if you get a certain number of sixes for successes or whatever, the way they actually do it is based on pairs. Like they kind of try to make it poker style, where the number on the die really doesn't matter except if there's another number of that same number on the die. So if you have a pair of sixes, for example, that's a success. If you have a pair of twos, still a success. If you get snake eyes, still a success, right? That's how they sort of go with it. And then if you get three of the same number, a three of a kind, that's obviously better than a pair, and so that's a better kind of success. If you get four of a kind, that's even better, right? And you've basically won the game at that point. But the real question to get to those numbers is how many dice do you roll? So firstly, like I said, it's going to be attribute plus skill, and they it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's spinning your car out or blasting a fool or jumping off a building. It doesn't matter. It's going to be your attribute plus skill, and so hopefully you have some numbers in those so that you have a nice big dice pool. But you really are only going to have, like, there's some modifiers. It does clarify there's some modifiers based on situational conditions or items or whatever the case is, but you're never going to have more than 9 dice in any roll, and you're never going to have less than 2 dice in any roll. It clarifies that in the rules. So you're going to be between 2 and 9 because they always want you to roll at least 2. So 9 is the maximum number of dice. So they have this whole system for success based on those pairings, right? So if you get a pair, it's a success. If you get a 3 of a kind, it's a critical success. If you get 4 of a kind, it's an extreme success. If you get 5 of a kind, it's an impossible success. And if you get 6 of a kind or more, that's just jackpot. You just do, right? Like nothing at that point will ever be able to beat you. You did whatever it was you were going to do. But the problem I have with that dice system is that it seems fine, but then you have to get a certain amount of success based on what you're doing. So, for example, the director, which is like the GM, might set a difficulty for something. Let's say you're climbing a fence, and they're like, okay, that's just basic difficulty. You might fail. We want to see if you're doing it, and you don't like alert the guard dogs or whatever that are inside the fence. So we're gonna have you roll for it. Otherwise, if it's action movie thing, it doesn't matter that much. Don't roll for it. Just do, right? But maybe there's some guard dogs or something. Let's see if you're trying to do it stealthy, to sneak inside the used car lot where you think the stolen cars are, or whatever the case is. That's a basic success. So you just have to get a pair. And if you get anything over that, well, that's fine. That doesn't matter. You just need a pair. But If they decide something like shooting an enemy's parachute while skydiving without your own parachute is impossible, then you need to get 5 of a kind. And you're only going to get 9 dice to do that, right? So there's a little bit of a problem I see there. Trying to read through the rules, it's kind of like I know the statistical analysis of a d6, and so I know that that might be kind of hard to do. So that seems a bit of a problem with the 9 dice maximum cap. They also have this thing called double difficulty, where if you have something that you might need 2 sets of pairs, for example, like 2 pairs to succeed. So that's another thing that sort of plays in, because 4 of a kind is not the same as 2 pairs. It's kind of a weird sort of setup, right? So, okay, that's a different situation. And a double difficulty, it sort of indicates, is not supposed to be common, but it is a common way to make things a little bit harder without actually increasing the difficulty. So maybe you wanted to climb the fence and do it stealthily, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to do double difficulty on this one, both basics. You need 2 pairs, but 2 pairs and 4 of a kind are not the same. So that's an interesting little factor that comes into play. I assume that a director might just take the 4 of a kind as 2 pair and just call it good. But the way the rules are written, that leaves some interpretation for the director to kind of go like, oh, well, that wasn't exactly. So you kind of succeeded, but you kind of failed. So we're going to do some failing forward, setbacky kind of thing. And I was like, okay. But then they also have this section under the dice rolling where they go, okay, well, if you get 3 successes of a lower kind, then you can trade them in for a level of success above. So, for example, if you get 3 pairs, which is 3 separate sets of pairs, right, then you can actually trade those 3 up as a critical success, which is a 3 of a kind. So you can trade 3 pairs as a 3 of a kind as far as the success level goes. That seems nice again. I think, well, that's kind of cool, except that I realized that if the maximum is 9 dice, then you're only ever going to be able to trade up to a 4 of a kind extreme success level. You're not going to be able to get an impossible or a jackpot from having like 6 sets of pairs, right? It seems weird to have 6 sets of pairs with 9 dice. I mean, we can't, right? You can't do that. So you could have 2 sets of 3, right? And that's sort of 3 sets of 3 is what I realized. I'm like, okay, well, 3 sets of 3. All right, so 3 of a kind is a critical success. So 3 sets of 3 you can trade in as a impossible success. Okay. That's kind of okay, but I doubt the statistical chances of that is actually pretty high. So I don't know, or pretty low that you're going to get it. Pretty high chance that you're going to fail. But I was like, well, hey, whatever. But you'll never be able to trade up to the impossible or jackpot. That's just never going to happen. So I was like, okay, well, that's an interesting idea, but I think that was probably something that came about in playtesting, and they wanted to mitigate people that just kept rolling a bunch of numbers that were exactly the same, and they weren't quite getting, like, people were getting like full houses, right? Like 3 of a kind and then a pair, and they were trying to figure out how to like change that in. I wish it did do that. Like if you did something like 3 of a kind and then 2, like a pair, it doesn't. I think it'd be kind of nice to play the poker angle a little bit and be like, oh, well, you got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's also something, right? Like that kind of thing. That would be nice. But they didn't do that, so that's kind of a thing. So essentially, you roll the dice and you try to see if you did it. So you're going to jump off a building, you're going to roll your pile of d6s and hope for pairs, right? Or whatever the case is, or 3 of a kind. You're hoping for the best. There are some feats in the game that let you re-roll the failures. There's also a way to re-roll failures if you just fail, or if you get like 1 pair. You have to get at least 1 pair to be able to re-roll. So you get 1 pair, and then you have a bunch of dice that don't matter. They don't match up with each other. There's nothing happening there. You can re-roll all the ones that aren't part of the pair, but if there's a chance of failure though. If you do that, you re-roll the set of dice, or all of the dice that aren't a pair, then you can potentially get 3 of a kind or 4 of a kind or whatever, or they come back with nothing related to the pair that you have, in which case you lose that pair as a success and you didn't get any successes, and then you're just sort of fail. They talk about failing forward, and they talk about trying to mitigate that by having an option that leads out of the failure, but it's still a failure. So that's the thing. And then there are some feats that also allow you a free reroll under certain circumstances. Like if you're driving and you have this like stunt driver kind of feat, you can reroll your failures for free and not lose the success that you already have. So, it goes like that. But then they also have these other ways of mitigating the dice rolls. They have these things called adrenaline, which is these sort of resources that you can use in the game. Adrenaline, in which you would trade in a point of adrenaline because you do something cool to gain adrenaline. You do something cool or getting more successes than necessary. So if you were trying to do basic success and you got 3 of a kind, well, cool, you get an adrenaline. Or you make a great sacrifice, or you do something very cool that everyone cheers about. If you pull off a one-liner that everyone laughs about, you can get adrenaline. And you would trade that in to get a +1 to your abilities. So you get another die, essentially, on the die roll. You get to add it to your skill or your attribute or whatever the case is. And so you get to add another die to the roll. Like, I'm going to trade in an adrenaline here, and I'm going to have an additional die. Another resource that you have is Spotlight. And you gain Spotlight by using the catchphrase that your character has, because each of the character archetypes in this game have catchphrases that go along with them. You're supposed to pick one as your character's catchphrase. And then there's also like the sort of background of your character, where you can choose some other things where you get sort of secondary kind of catchphrases or something. But you use a catchphrase, or when you play on the character's flaw, when every character has a flaw. So if you play on the character's flaw in the story or use a catchphrase, you gain a Spotlight. And what you do with those is, at a time when you're going to do some action, you can spend a Spotlight to automatically gain a success, to save a friend, to save your vehicle if you're doing something like falling out of a plane in your car, right? If you're jumping from space in your car, you can use the Spotlight to survive it. And then there's conditions for damage and stuff, and you can use the Spotlight to remove those. But whenever you use a Spotlight, this is the cool thing about Spotlights. I thought, okay, that's fine. That sounds fine. I've seen that kind of thing before. But what I thought was cool was that when you use a Spotlight, you flip a coin. And it's a 50-50 chance. If you end up getting a heads or whatever, then you get to keep the Spotlight. You don't lose it. If you get tails, then you drop the Spotlight. So it's kind of cool because you use the Spotlight and then you potentially could retain it. So you can use the Spotlight again later, which is a nice thing. But I talked about conditions. So in this game, like any other game, you're going to John Wick your way through something, and so you're going to basically be doing the fighting stuff. Well, the way that it works is that they basically just, the Game Master continues on this difficulty thing and just calls them danger for combat. I don't know why they do that, but it's fine. It's danger. So there's basic danger, there's impossible danger, there's critical danger, that kind of thing. And you make a roll against the difficulty based on whatever that is. So it's the same as difficulties, so that's why I don't know why they changed it. But they did change the terminology, even though it's exactly the same. So you're just going to roll based on the difficulty that is what you're trying to succeed or, hit or succeed. If you don't meet the requirement against the danger, if, say, like the director's like, oh, this is an impossible danger at you because you're falling out of a plane in your car and you're headed straight for the ground and your parachute may or may not work, right? You make this impossible danger roll. If you fail, then you take hit point damage, which is represented by a term called grit. So you lose grit. If you succeed, however, then you mitigate some of this grit loss. So that's how it kind of goes. So if you needed to get impossible and you got critical, right, which is right below that, then extreme right below that. Yeah, extreme right below that. Then you wouldn't take all of the damage from the impossible damage. And there's a chart on that. You wouldn't take all of the impossible damage. You would instead take some portion of the impossible damage. You would still sort of mitigate some of the damage you took. But if you got no successes, then you take all of it. If you got a basic, you take less than all of it. That kind of thing. If you lose too much grit, your character is just too beat up, you make a spin on the death roulette. And this is actually the interesting part of the game that I saw. It's kind of like the out of action table in some of the other games that I've seen, like the Black Hack 2.0, where you have essentially a chance that your character dies, but maybe not. So you make a roll on the death roulette where you would roll a d6, and if it's lower than your death roulette number, which is represented by a 6-cylinder with bullets inside of it, you start 1 when you start the game, but then you gain these sort of death roulette points based on some things that you do or conditions you get. And then you would just, or you could, you take them and then you can heal them by, doing stuff. But anyway, you get the death roulette number, you make your die roll. If it's lower than the death roulette number, you're boned. If it's higher than the death roulette number, you're fine. So you don't end up getting dead. But that's how it goes. However, you can sleep off grit, you can or sleep off grit damage. You can catch a break, or you can at the end of a game session, the grit sort of resets itself. The idea being this is like your movie plot armor kind of stuff. But essentially, the death roulette's like a death save in most other games. So you want to stay lower than the lethal bullet of the death roulette to be alive. If you don't, then you're left for dead, and it's all over. However, if the director doesn't want your character to die because of plot reasons or whatever, they can have your character be gone for a scene or two and then come back at a pertinent point in the story where it's like tense and part of maybe the showdown with the big boss or something. Your character gains a scar, which is a piece of information, like sort of thing. It's like a pertinent thing to the story. A scar is essentially something that your character carries with them. It's part of their experience and leveling up kind of thing. But then they get to come back at that like pinnacle scene, and that's how it goes. So that's what they do. So the game is kind of oriented toward making action movie situations and making them fun. And it's not too complicated. Like that's it. That's the whole set of rules. When you build your character, you're just basically going, okay, I've got 3 free points to put into skills, and I've got 2 free points to put into abilities, that kind of thing. And then you just kind of go from there. But then you can also gain experiences. Like the scars, like I said, will give you experience. Reputation things that you do. If you gain reputation, whether it's good or bad, you gain experience. If you bond with someone, whether it's a PC or NPC, you gain experience. If you had a moment in the story where you learned something, you gain experience. And so this is how they do their kind of beats of story to, grow the character's experience. And you can trade in experience to gain like 2 ability points or skill points to up your skills, or you can gain a feat, or you can gain adrenaline. Basically, yeah, you just or you can just hold on to them and at a certain point in the story where it becomes pertinent, you can just trade in an experience point to gain another die on your pool, kind of like the way you'd use adrenaline. But instead of gaining adrenaline for your characters, like adrenaline maximum kind of thing, you would, would just hold on to that experience. And then the idea being you sort it into the play. Like maybe you almost died at the hands of like some mini boss, and then later the mini boss comes up and you're like, this is the guy who almost killed me. I'm going to use my experience from that situation to have an extra die in the pool. So it's a well-written game. It's not too complicated. The thing that I was talking about, the thing that's most complicated is that dice system, where it seems like they were going for something, and I'm not saying that they didn't get there. It just feels like the execution is probably a little different than they were necessarily intending. But I'm sure it works out well for most people. I have yet to actually play it. I just read through the rules and kind of did some test runs and some character creation and things. And overall, it's super easy to make a character, super easy to play a character. So it's not bad at all. In a nutshell, you basically are going to take a pile of D6s and do crazy action movie things. Everything overall is great. The aesthetics of the book is great. On page 67, it shows the chances of success. Like I said, I know the math behind it, but they show the chance of success, and it's kind of weird. That's the part of the dice system that kind of gets me. Like the dice roll thing is like, there's like some point where you're only going to get a 5% chance of succeeding at whatever it is you're doing, which is kind of like, okay, that's a weird place to put difficulty, but it's fine. But the dice system is sort of designed to have these heavy swings, right? The trade-off is like you just swing heavily if you're like you're gonna go for it or you're not, right? It's gonna go for broke or don't. That's about it. So overall, I would give it a 1.5 thumbs. I would like, don't get me wrong, just the aesthetics alone, and the way that the game, it's written well, it's well organized, easy to read. There's great art. You can see this like John Wickian style like rip-off art here that they did. They admitted that it was inspired by the John Wick stuff, so it was fine. Like they admitted to it, right? Before anyone called them out on it, they admitted to it, so that's fine. But like it would be 2 thumbs for that. But this is just the dice system got a little weird for me, where I was going like, well, I mean, it's not hard. It's not complicated at all. Super easy dice system. I was just like, the math doesn't seem to reflect the idea that you're trying to do. So I'm going to go ahead and give it 1.5 stars, just because I think that there might have been a slightly better way to do the dice system to make it do exactly what they wanted to do. But they chose to go the way they went. But overall, I think it's great. It's pretty fun. It gave me some ideas for some directions I'm taking Fast Action Hero. So, I would say if you're in the mood for a semi-easy action-oriented game, this is definitely the game to play. And they also have a bunch of kind of cool little supplemental stuff for different scenarios and things. So it's actually not bad as a buy for an RPG, and it wasn't too expensive if I remember correctly. I did back the Kickstarter, so I can't really tell you what the retail value is out on the street, but quite enjoyable. So I would recommend giving it a chance if you want to try it out. But anyway, that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a nice day and good gaming.